right, so chapter 9 is about soil and the basics of agriculture. So it's a two-part kind of unit, and the next one will go into more about recombinant DNA and genetic modification. So anyway, we're going to talk about major agricultural developments and how we can look at soil and keep it from getting eroded, and how can we farm more sustainably. So these guys are, they look really happy. I think they're just cold because they're holding up. They're holding up clods of dirt, and the purpose of this, as you can see, the roots of the plants are still attached to the, nothing's happening. The roots of the plants are still attached to the dirt, and so why that's significant, what they're doing is they're practicing no-till farming. And no-till farming, there we go. No-till farming is, it allows a lot of people that farm in the Midwest to prevent soil erosion. But if you look, there's all this residue, and they have some cover crops. What's going to happen when they plant the next year's corn? This is basically corn stalks. All of these stalks will never be turned over. They're not plowing it. Okay? And so what they're going to have to do to kill all the weeds that are growing up here, since they're not turning the soil over, is they'll have to use pesticide. And so this is where we talked about like Roundup Ready soybeans and stuff. You can spray Roundup on all this and then not have to till it and then plant the next year's crops. So when we talk about GMOs, there is the positive side of it if you think about that. And then you save fossil fuels when you don't till. So we're going to get into that. No-till farming, leaving the crop residue, that means the stalks and stuff, in place, and then the roots will stay in place and hold the soil until you plant the next year. And then if you're between different years, what is a harvest? There we go. We can plant cover crops, and so those can prevent erosion. Basically, there's two things that cause erosion: lack of plant roots to hold soil in place, and gravity. So if we could have some kind of plants or make the terrain be a little bit flatter, those are going to keep your soil in place. So agriculture, people think of agriculture and they think of land used for growing crops, but it's also land used for raising livestock. And so it's not just cropland, it's also rangeland or pasture. And on the AP exam, you'll be expected to know that about 40%, I know it says 38, but about 40% of the Earth's solid, dry surface is dedicated to growing crops or for grazing. So soil, what is that? Soil it's more than just pieces of rock. It's actually living, it's an ecosystem in all itself. So it has rock and then also organic matter, in case like some of Annie's cheddar bunnies get dropped. That's not funny. Okay. So that's dead stuff. Leaf litter, manure, that kind of stuff. Water, gases, nutrients, and microorganisms. And so it's obviously something that can be replenished. It's renewable technically, but it takes 500 years to form an inch of topsoil. So what we have to look at there is the fact that if we're having erosion and it's moving that soil out of place faster than it can be formed, then it's no longer a sustainable or renewable resource. It's when it becomes non-renewable, we could really lose our topsoil. So it's only sustainable if we're allowing it to form faster than we're allowing it to erode. So agriculture and plants require healthy soil, no joke. That's nothing crazy there. As far as what's in soil, we have organic matter, and so that's our humus with one M, and we'll get into that in a minute. But that's going to retain water. Nutrients such as phosphorus and nitrogen, those are the biggest two. The three macronutrients for soil are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen and phosphorus being the most important and the most in need. And those are the ones that also get into waterways after we apply fertilizer and cause eutrophication, because aquatic plants need them as well. And so soil structure and texture, that's basically the, do we have a lot of clay, do we have a lot of sand, do we have a lot of silt, is it clumpy? And so that's kind of what we're getting into. I don't feel like I need to be your history teacher right now, but I think you know that agriculture kind of popped up independently around the world in different locations. And traditionally agriculture was subsistence based, which means that families only grew enough food for their families. And then they practice polyculture quite often. My husband was an archaeologist, and he talks about the three sisters. Have they all ever heard of that? Yeah. So maybe is that AP World History that you talk about the three sisters in what class? World History? Maybe? Well, if you don't know what the three sisters are, whoa, that's a giant. There we go. So if we have some corn, okay, it looks just like a big stalk, and you have some ears there and there. That's exactly what corn looks like. And then if we plant also maybe some beans, the beans will actually grow up the corn stalk. Like if I have beans in my garden, which I do, like I actually have like a wire fence, and then I will help the plants to grow up the wire fence. And so this is kind of an artificial way to do that. And then the third sister, that's the first two sisters, the third sister was actually squash. And so squash, I don't know if you know what squash plants look like. They kind of look like a big elephant ear, like a big leaf on the ground. So the squash kind of, such a good artist, just on the ground like that, and there's a squash like right there. It looks like a flower, but whatever. Squash flowers are really pretty yellow flowers. So there's your three sisters, and the beans, they didn't, I don't know if they understood this at the time, but the beans were, you know, legumes that had the nitrogen fixing roots. And so because they intercropped these and planted them together in this polyculture kind of setting, they didn't have as much problem with depleting the nutrients out of the soil, because corn needs a certain set of macronutrients. Well, squash is a little bit different, and so is beans. And so if we plant them together and not always this 1,000 acres as corn, then we don't have as much problem with nutrient depletion. So, all right, so industrialized agriculture, what they did, they used large-scale mechanization to boost yields, and so this really happened post-industrial revolution. And so what we've done is we've started to harness the energy of fossil fuels to be more efficient. And so what we do now, we have more of a monoculture kind of system. And monocultures, they're more efficient, right? And so some of these combines, those large tractor things that can run over corn and like shuck it and take the kernels off the cob and do all that in one fell swoop, and then put the kernels in a big truck beside it, that machine can cost $300,000 or $400,000. Okay, and so you're not going to intercrop that.
Please excuse this interruption. A reminder for all seniors, please make sure you go by the Herb Jones table across from the media center to pick up your graduation items, and as well as
this will be forever eternalized in this movie.
Seniors, students, please go to the Herb Jones table to pick up your graduation items.
Did we do that at the same time? That's awesome. So anyway, monocultures have just a single crop because they have these specialized mechanized machines that help to harvest that. The Green Revolution happened later, so we're talking about mid-1900s, 1960s really. A guy named Norman Borlaug, who we're going to talk about on Monday, he came up with some new, better yielding varieties of wheat, and it was really wheat that they used. And so like in India and Mexico, he showed the farmers in those countries how to plant this wheat. Now, the wheat of like, if I was able to go back to like the time of Jesus, even though I'm allergic to wheat, I could eat that wheat. Okay, and so what we did was when we, my time machine's in the shop right now, so maybe like later I could do that. But wheat is really like waist high, and then like little wheat berries, like little kernels that we actually eat, are the top, and so the stalk was quite long. And so the wheat that we grow today is like knee high, and the kernels or the little wheat berries are much larger. And so people that are allergic to wheat are allergic to the modern wheat, may not be allergic to older varieties, which is pretty interesting. I don't really care about eating a Twinkie or some bread, so I'm good. But the Green Revolution did that through better yielding varieties, but it was not genetic modification that occurred. They just did traditional breeding techniques. And so in addition to those better yielding varieties, he started to introduce people to using mechanization, to using irrigation, to using chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and that really boosted production and temporarily halted or slowed down hunger in India and Mexico. But now we see that India has 1.2 billion people, and so that really just delayed the problem, right? And so now they're still growing their population. There comes a point where you can't really increase crop production, and they're there. So soil is a system, like I said, it's kind of its own little ecosystem, has lots of life in there. Here's some life in the dirt. Dirt's really quite beautiful. I don't know why that snail's so big, but moving on. So the parent material of dirt, the mother and father, I'm just kidding, come together, no. But what ends up is the parent material is actually just the bedrock. And so when we went out to the parking lot and I showed you the rock, over there, and we looked at the weathering of the rock and how the soil is forming on top. The limestone in the parking lot is the parent material, and so the bedrock is there. So weathering is where large rock particles break down into smaller ones. There's three kinds of weathering: physical, chemical, and biological. And so people get the terms chemical, physical, they get the terms weathering, erosion, and deposition mixed up. So I have a little sticky note here. And so just to help you understand, when I weather a rock, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, just tearing this up, right? I'm just going to break it into smaller pieces. So this could be through the acids from lichens and mosses. That would be chemical weathering. This could be from the tree roots. That's biological and actually physical weathering. Or it could be like animal hooves, or it could be ice wedging, like in the book we read, where the ice got into the cracks and broke it open. So that's weathering, breaking the rock into smaller pieces. And actually the motion, like, oops, that's erosion too. But motion and erosion kind of rhyme, sort of. If you are a good rapper, you can make them rhyme. I don't know if I am. But this is erosion, and then when they drop, usually in the ocean, right, like outside the parking lot, because it's a hole in the ground, that's deposition. So that's weathering. Now, humus is if you've ever had to rake leaves, or you've ever had to like move a dead tree, or if you just go out in the woods and kind of move some stuff out of the way. That's the spongy black stuff that kind of gross looking, you know, underneath all that, and it holds moisture. I mean, humus, if you think about like that part of the woods or underneath the leaves or whatever, it's moist, right? And so humus is not to be confused with hummus, which is a delicious chickpea dip. And the way you can keep it straight is because hummus has that extra because it's good. Yes. Thank you. Drum roll, please. That might be the corniest thing I've said today, but the day is young, so I'm keeping tally. So again, weathering, different ways we can break these rocks into smaller pieces. And that, do you have?
Does that diagram show like how much of an impact these types of weathering makes, or is it like the percentage?
Most weathering is due to water, so it's either going to be a lot of it's through running water, like in the bottom of streams, that kind of stuff, or the ice wedging.
I just see that it's like more compact at the bottom than the top. That's all I was wondering if that had anything to do with.
No, I think that's just an illustrative creativity there. But weathering is most often caused by some kind of action of water. So water. Soil forms very slowly, and it has to do with like how fast. Has to do with the climate. So if you have a warm, wet climate, soil's going to form faster because chemical changes happen faster in those climates. Organisms, they're going to break down and add organic material, and topography. Like think about how deep the soil is on the top of a mountain. You ever seen somebody climb like Mount Everest? Is there like a garden up there of deep dirt? No, that's not a thing. So because the things are going to run downhill. So if you think about where we actually farm and where the dirt's good, it's in a valley, right? Yes. Okay, good. So topography has a lot to do with that. And then what kind of parent material? For example, our parent material outside is limestone. So it's made of calcium carbonate, easy to weather. That's what caves are made of. Remember we told you about the cave? Cave, yes. Granite is a much harder bedrock material, so if you have a granitic bedrock, it's going to take a lot longer to weather. So time, yes. All right, horizon. In art class, I feel like horizons go like this. That's the thing, yes? And so if I put all these horizons together and I give them some letters, like that. Oh, wait, just for fun, I can't leave out one. And then, you know, Soul sends you a friend request on Facebook, like that's their profile picture, all the horizons together. You want to be my friend? No? Get kind of dirty. Okay, so that's the Soul profile. Somebody like groaned back there. That's awesome. You're a captive audience. You can't get out of here. So leaching. Leaching is where you go swimming and things get stuck to you. No, just kidding. It's where dissolved particles move down through the horizons and they could end up in drinking water. So when we're talking about groundwater contamination and water problems, leaching is the word for stuff at the surface going down through the soil profile. Topsoil is good for agriculture. It's in the O and A horizons. Let's talk about the horizons. I'm going to tell you the things you need to know. The O horizon is very important for retaining moisture. And it's O because it has a lot of organic material. It actually is technically all organic material. I'm going to use the letter O for organic. Can you hang with me, or did I write the whole word? You good? All right, so topsoil is mostly organic, and then it has a little bit of mineral in it, and this is really important for agriculture. Agriculture needs this. Okay. Now, check out the Erosion. It's kind of lighter in color. When you have a lighter color in a soil profile, that indicates leaching. And so minerals are actually leached from here. Minerals are leached. And there's a question on your test that people miss because they get where the stuff is leached from and where it gets deposited mixed up. So minerals are leached or carried from the Erosion and they're deposited in the Erosion, which is why the Erosion is a little darker. Okay, so this is where they're actually deposited. A lot of textbooks, I don't know if yours does, will call the Erosion the zone of deposition. Like this is the zone of leaching. This is the zone of deposition. That might have been my college geology book. I don't know about yours.
So what horizons do roots go through?
Okay, so I'm about to get to that action. The sea horizon will be mostly mineral and a little bit of organic, and that will be roots. So, does that answer your question? And then this is just all parent material. So this is all mineral. Okay. How you feel? That's it. That's the thing. Easy peasy, huh? So, on your test, be able to, tell me the differences in the layers or the horizons and what is in each and which ones are most important for agriculture. Soil color is a legitimate physical soil test, and as you start to study for your FRQs, there's a FRQ about soil testing, and so you can actually say that color is important because darker shows you have more humus or organic material and lighter shows leaching. Texture is the size of the particles. You have to know that clay is small and silt is medium-sized particles. Oh, okay, I didn't know that was a thing. And then sand is large particles. All right, so let's say that you go get outside in the clay and it's just rained, and get in and you get you're like 8 years old and you got your new blue jeans on and you get in the clay and it just rained. What's going to happen to your pants forever?
It's never going to hang.
They're going to be stained red forever. And can we all agree that that is clay? Is there any debate there? Cool. Let's take in our minds and go to the beach. And in your new pants as an 8-year-old, you just rub those knees right into the sand. Your pants going to be stained forever? No, you're good. You brush it off. Now, what's going on then? So sand is very large. The particles are so large they cannot get in between the fibers of your cotton. That's what is happening. The clay, though, is so small it can get stuck between those fibers and then not come out. So that's why stuff gets, stained. But then if I think about clay in your yard, if it rains, you're also going to have a mud puddle, right? And so it might take a couple days for that water to actually go down through and infiltrate the ground there. It's going to stay at the surface. The reason for that is clay particles are so small, I can't even draw it. I'm trying. They're so tiny, they have very little pore space in between. They have low porosity. And so when I have low porosity, if it rains, the water's going to try to get through there and it's going to get stuck at the surface. Well, sand's huge, right? So if it rains on some sand, every time you go to the beach, the whole ocean hits the shore and in 2 minutes it's dry again. Right? That's a lot of water. So these particles are large. And so because they're large, they're going to have big pore space. So when it rains the beach or the ocean just comes by and hits it with a wave, this can just go right down through there and it drains easily. And so that's the whole thing. What you want as a farmer is you want an even mixture, and the AP example tests this heavily. They want loam. Loam is an even mixture of sand, silt, and clay, and because you want your soil to drain, but you also want it to retain some moisture. And so it also how easy the soil is to cultivate. So that means how easy is it to turn over or plow the soil. If you have just clay, it's hard as a rock because it makes a little hard patty. That's how pottery works. You're trying to make a pot out of sand, it don't work. Okay, sometimes I feel like I explained too much, didn't need to know about the whole nature of the entire universe, but I found that to be very interesting. No one ever explained it to me like that, and I was like, All right, now let me show you how to read this soil triangle, and then I want you to take another swing at your doodle if you need to. So what happens if you're lucky? There's like 5 questions on the test, and like number 1 on the test, which may not be your number 1. I have to decide how much I'm going to edit your stuff. So we're going to go and we can read that this goes up like that. And so whatever percentage clay we have, we're going to go up like this. And so let's just pretend that I have, 20% clay. Do you see how this, like a line would go this way with that? Now, let's just say that I have maybe 15, no, that was right, clay. Let's just say I have 15% silt. So the silt line is coming this way. Sometimes they'll have an arrow, sometimes they won't. So you have to make one if there's not one. So 15% this. And so if I come over here and I draw a line and make it really, that was not straight at all. But if I make another line, and let's just say that it looks like I have to have 65% sand. I mean, because percentages have to add up to 100, right? And so this is right on the line between sandy clay loam and sandy loam. So that's how you would do that. If it's right on the line, I don't think don't lose sleep over what I do if it's right on the line. It won't, on your test on the AP exam, it won't be right on the line. But what you would say is just, it's somewhere between sandy clay loam and a sandy loam, which, fine. So did you have trouble with your now? Like you were not totally sure about how to do it? Yeah, so go ahead and take a look at that, and I'll pull it up so you can check it out too. And then we'll talk about it. Oh, I didn't know that Microsoft Word now had a smiley face feature. Did y'all see that? Did not know that was a thing. Bless you indeed. I'm just going to scooch this down. All right, take another minute. Take a look at it, and we'll talk about this. Yeah, just do that. Just do that. Thank you. And the soil triangle on the lab is a little bit harder to read because it's not in color. So on the AP exam, they're kind of shaded in so you can read it. And then the one on the PowerPoint is in color. So you might find that to be easier to work with. So let's talk about these. On number 1, if I have 15% clay, 70% sand, and 15% silt, what kind of soil would I have? Nathaniel, what did you get?
I got sandy loam.
Okay, so let's take a look at that and make sure that, we all agree. So 15% clay would be here, 70% sand would be here. And so they should, what I like to do when I'm working with soil triangles is I'll draw the first 2 and then independently draw the third, and then if it intersects, and I know I did it right, and so the 15% silt does intersect, and so you do get a sandy loam. How do you feel about this? Okay. There's one of these soil triangle questions on the test that's really kind of hard. I remember last year, I had a student that almost kind of convinced me that the test was wrong, but it wasn't after I looked at it. So well, when you do take the test, it does have like 4 or 5 of these. And be really careful because it doesn't. There's no typos on it. I looked at it really carefully. So heads up. But y'all are better test takers than some of them. So, Callie, what'd you get for number 2? Clay. So I have 50% clay. So there's that line. 20% sand. And so I'm seeing that I do have clay, and let's just check 30% silt does intersect. So clay, good. And so that's Georgia. Just all of this whole area is large, just for our state. They're not here. Gavin, what'd you get for the 3rd one? Okay, so let's start over. 30. Sometimes they will give you only 2 pieces of information, but then you have to know that percentages have to add up to 100. So 35% clay is here. And then 30% sand is here. And so I should get a clay loam. And it looks like I do. So, we good? Anybody got any questions? It's not hard, but what you have to do is think about where the arrows will go if you have trouble. Alrighty. And then on your test, it does have, this is the diagram, not the one in the lab. So you probably, will like that a little bit better. All right, moving on with our lives, since we got that down. That will help you when you go to do your soil lab tomorrow. Let me kind of scooch this out. So soil structure is its clumpiness, and so one of the soil tests that you can measure clumpiness is doing a ribbon test. And so a ribbon test tells you how the friability, which that's just a random word, but how clumpy it is. You can test it by taking like a piece of clay. For example, imagine being in pottery and taking a piece of clay, and you could kind of like make a ribbon out of it. Like you could sort of squeeze it through your fingers and make a long thread of it. See what I'm saying? So that would tell you how clumpy it is. Now, if it's really clumpy and you have big clods of dirt, that's not helpful to you as a farmer. What's going to end up happening is if you repeatedly till the soil, it's going to compact it. It's going to close those pore spaces. It's going to make the clumpiness will keep your new seeds from being able to take root, and it will keep the air and the water from being able to get through the soil. And so when we talk about compacting soil and why this is important, a really example of poor soil structure is if we went out to the cafeteria, all right there beside the cafeteria there used to be grass, but now it's just a bunch of dirt and it's really ugly. Have you been out there? There's no vegetation because that's where people walk. And if you've ever went somewhere and you've seen like a trail where people walk and there's no vegetation, it's because people have compacted the soil there and they kept the water and the air from getting to the plant roots. And so what you have to do, have you ever seen a soil aerator? It looks like a little steamroller. It has spikes on it. They're doing that to open up the pore spaces in the soil again because it's been compacted. Very interesting. Now we're like, yeah, that's what that thing is. It looks like a torture device for ants. I'll get you, insects of the world, but it's actually just to open up the pore spaces in the soil. So this right here is a chemical test. It's not a big deal. I don't think it's worth our time to talk about it. I haven't seen it on the AP exam. So soil characteristics vary from place to place. We are talking about rainforests have pretty poor soil because everything gets leached out. And even if they do have some replenishing leaf litter, that gets weathered very quickly, and so it gets taken back up into the plants. Because the soil quality is so poor in the rainforest, if we look here, you can see that they really have red clay. Like in the rainforest, they have red clay. We have red clay too because it rains a lot here. But we just have a nice topsoil layer on top of our red clay, and they don't. Okay, so this indicates leaching, and there's really no organic material at all. It's all gone. So what they have to do in the rainforest, they have to do swidden agriculture. And swidden agriculture is where you're going to slash an area, burn it. The burning of the vegetation will add a small organic material layer at the top, and that will only last for a couple years. What you've done is you've removed the plant roots because you killed the plants. And on top of that, the carbon dioxide from the biomass will go back into the atmosphere, causing climate to warm. But then also you don't have a tree to sequester carbon, and so you mess yourself over 2 different ways. plus you cause soil erosion. So what they'll do is they'll do that, and they'll have a tiny little layer of organic material, so then that doesn't last very long, so they'll have to cut another area, and they'll let this area grow back. But we're doing it faster than they're allowing it to grow back, and so that becomes unsustainable. What they're doing in these areas is they're grazing cattle. They're grazing beef cattle or production of meat, because they're increasing, like in Brazil, they're increasing their meat consumption. And so who are we to be like, don't eat so much meat, and don't clear all your forests? We already did all that to ours, okay? Plus they don't have a grassland area like we do, not as large anyway, because they don't have the right latitude and the right climate for it. So they're having to kind of make something. Now, speaking of grassland, this is our Iowa soil profile. This looks a little more friendly to me as a profile picture. So there is our O horizon, our A horizon, and then there's that zone of leaching, that E horizon. And then the B is not pictured, okay? And so that's much thicker, and that looks a lot better. And the reason the topsoil is good is because it doesn't have a lot of moisture to leach out the minerals. But luckily for us, yay, we have the world's oldest and largest aquifer underneath the Midwest. I mean, really, it's just like, we got it going on as far as that goes. Too bad we're like overusing it. So I just explained wood and agriculture, and that's where they're going to slash and burn and move on. Conserving it, obviously, that's going to be caused by removing vegetation. It's going to diminish biodiversity. We already talked about all that. Degradation is a word we've already addressed as well. It's just to kind of mess something up, right? And so over the past 50 years, soil degradation has reduced food production by 13%. And so we kind of are at the end of our turnip that we're squeezing, right? We're trying to get as much out of the land as possible, but as we do that, we increase erosion, and we're having trouble like this nice man in China. That looks really terrible. So it looks like it has a lot of leach material, not a lot of organic material in the soil. Overgrazing is the #1 cause for soil degradation, then deforestation, and then cropland agriculture. Erosion deposition, and we just talked about this, and I explained it with the sticky note. That happened, yes. And so erosion is going to happen more quickly where you don't have plant roots and where you have a slope. This is called gullying erosion. It starts as a real RILL, like a little tiny area, and then it gets larger. That's really quite marked. So erosion is going to make land more vulnerable because we're going to overcultivate fields and overgraze, and so yeah. Moving on. It is hard to measure erosion. Like, how do you measure how much soil has washed off of an area? Kind of hard to do that. We know how to prevent it though. Roots are good. No-till agriculture is good because we're going to have the plant roots from the old crops, and then plant cover crops when it's not in use. Of course, humans are the primary cause of erosion, aren't we all? So this class is just like, and we're terrible. So conventional agriculture, I like how they had to make a break in the graph here because the scale just needed to, like, we need to up the ante by a factor of 10, so we just make a little break in the graph. So conventional agriculture causes erosion of about 4 millimeters a year, whereas native vegetation and conservation agriculture is about, 0.05 millimeters or 0.1 millimeter. I mean, that's very, very small. That's, we're talking about a fingernail. Desertification, I think let's just take a little break and we'll start here in just a second. Desertification is where you go to Dairy Queen and you picked your favorite treat. Joking. Sure, you can get some water. I feel like this is taping, but I also feel like I can't find where it is. Desertification really sounds like it's time to go to Dairy Queen, but that's not actually what happens. And it sounds like that sounds like a desert. It's not even that, because you're not making a desert. You're just losing 10% of the production of a land area. So that's not as extreme as you would think. So don't get confused by that if you're having to answer questions about it. So why do we have desertification? Deforestation is the leading cause. Soil compaction, where you no longer have the vegetation, and overgrazing, drought. We're going to talk about salinization here in a minute. Remember we talked about how your tears are salty? Yeah. So salinization is where salts build up in the soil. And then water depletion is also an issue. Climate change, yeah, because we get areas that have some moisture, but then they start to have droughts, and so climate change can cause it as well. This is particularly bad in semi-arid and arid lands, and so these drier areas like sub-Saharan Africa, for example, because they don't have enough trouble. So water erosion is the leading cause with soil structure, and then wind erosion. We don't have a lot of wind erosion around here, so we don't really appreciate that, but in coastal areas that's more of an issue. Island countries and areas, that's an issue. Like the state of Hawaii has a lot of wind erosion, and they have shelter belts, which we're going to talk about. So this has happened in a lot of places, and do recall what a positive feedback loop is. What happens when you have an area that goes through desertification, that degradation forces farmers into farming on poor areas of soil, and so those areas will get degraded, and then you'll have to continue that pattern, and you'll have a loss of nutrients, and just you won't be able to let the farmers let the land lay fallow, which means let it rest. Like, you're not going to be able to do that because you have less and less land available to you. So the Dust Bowl, I think you're all familiar with that. What ended up happening late 1800s, early 1900s, grew a lot of wheat out west, kind of like eastern Colorado, western Oklahoma, places that are pretty arid in the United States that aren't the best for agriculture. We really used unsuitable land and removed the native grasses, so we removed what was holding the soil in place, and that led to the Dust Bowl after we had a nice little drought. And so what ended up happening here, the winds in the United States move from west to east. They're called the westerlies. That's why we can look on the weather and see like what's happening in Alabama and then decide if we're going to have a tornado or not. Okay. Anyway, the winds blew this way and carried some of this soil and sediment, and it would cover houses and whole areas. So here's Kansas, and there's a dust storm. And I watched a really cool PBS documentary on the Dust Bowl. People got to get in their houses and have to seal the doors and windows, and still everything would just be covered in dust. It was a hot mess. So anyway, there's that. So what ended up happening as a response to the Dust Bowl is conservation districts were formed. And so they, under federal direction at this county level, representative would come out and help the local farmers, help to prevent erosion. That is actually the service. Was renamed the Natural Resources Conservation Service. That's on your test. You may want to look and make a note of that. And so not only is it in control of just soil now, but also water issues and water pollution control. So the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And so these people are happy because the Natural Resources Conservation Service are helping them. That's also occurring now in Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. Okay? I don't know. One of those two ways I said it is right. We'll just go with it. So how can we prevent soil erosion? So crop rotation. The reason you're going to rotate crops, like I had told you already, I don't know, like 17 times about corn and soy, how we can rotate them because soy puts the nitrogen back in the soil. Here's the example of it right there. You can also alternate with wheat if you need to. Contour farming and then terracing. I have a picture of that, so let me show you what those look like. So contour farming is not the same as terracing. Contour farming is going to be more suitable for like rolling sort of hills, and you're going to sort of plant along the contour of the land. Terracing is more for step-like areas. And so these step-like areas, we're going to flood them, and then we're going to have, in this situation, like this would be a rice paddy, okay? And it was on the side of mine. I think that's beautiful. I mean, I don't know you, but if they didn't have those terraces, and you can imagine just everything going downhill. So that wouldn't really work out. Intercropping, I talked a little bit about that a second ago with the Three Sisters. It's going to increase ground cover, which prevents erosion. A lot of erosion actually caused by rainfall, like the hitting of the rain against the surface. So also can have shelter belts, and then we have the no-till. Conservation tillage is just a little bit less strict than no-till. They just don't till as much. But windbreaks, I have a picture of that. And so when I went to Hawaii, there's a lot of coffee plantations, and you know, if you go to Starbucks and buy coffee, you know, in a bag, it's like $7 or $8. But if you buy coffee in a bag from Hawaii, it's like $30 a bag if you buy the good kind. I mean, it's really, really expensive. So they put up these shelter belts of trees, like this might be the coffee farm, and coffee grows on like this little, looks like a little bush. But they have this it looks just like this, and they have the area with the trees surrounding the crops. And so, because it's an island, you really do have what's called land and sea breezes. I mean, when you go to the beach, it's windy most of the time, especially where they are located in the Pacific. Here's intercropping. This is what my garden looks like. This is not a picture of my garden, but I just switch out. My garden really does look similar. I don't have it. They have a shelter belt in the back. I don't have that. I just have like the trees in my backyard, whatever. Here's no-till farming. You can see they left the stalk residue, and they just kind of poke. They can either just poke a hole with a seed drill in the soil and drop a seed down and cover it, or you can make a furrow. Can y'all? So if you furrow your brow like this is a furrow. That little ridge in the middle. That looks pretty, doesn't it? And so you can make a furrow and leave the rest of the residue, and then plant in the furrow and cover it. Both of those things work. No-till farming has a lot of benefits. It does reduce erosion. It uses less labor, right? So it cuts on your costs. And if you think about it, it's going to help mitigate climate change because you have to run the tractors over the soil less, so you're not burning as much oil in doing that. It does add organic material to the soil as well, because you're leaving the stalk residue there. So here's the benefits. I already talked about that. In addition, it does save on a lot of erosion. You can see that erosion rates have declined from 9.1 tons per hectare to 5.9 tons per hectare. So that's a lot. Other countries are doing this. The thing about that, we already talked about, because you are leaving the stalks and the residue there, you're going to have to use herbicides, because whatever weeds are there, you're going to have to kill chemically because you're not turning over the soil. The orange and the red parts are where they're practicing no-till farming at high rates, and so you can see it's very popular. So really, plant cover is having plant roots is a key to erosion control, and then, like I said, trying to flatten the slope of the land. China has a tree planting program in progress, but it's not. I mean, when we have tree plantations, whether it's for growing pine trees for paper or whatever China's doing here, that's not a functional forest. It doesn't have the biodiversity that's present naturally. Overgrazing. Just talk about this a little bit. But think about if I'm a blade of grass, you know, do my little grassy thing, and so I'm performing photosynthesis above the ground. If a cow comes and eats me down to that much is left, you know, I'm not going to be able to do photosynthesis and regrow. And so that's the issue. And then another thing is, you have that compaction that's happening from the hooves of the animals. And they close up the pore spaces, and then the vegetation can't regrow, which is, you know, happening outside in the area around the cafeteria. So I don't think anybody's overgrazing over there, but soil compaction for sure. People keep leaving their goats out. I'm just kidding. But we do have goats now. It'd be interesting to see if the soil is getting compacted where the goats are. So when you do have soil compaction and when you do have overgrazing, the invasive species can really take hold because they're less palatable to livestock, so they're not eaten, and then you have a positive feedback loop where whatever vegetation that's native gets eaten and it's gone, and then that leaves areas where the invasive species can get in there. A lot of positive feedback loops today. Speaking of positive feedback loops, this illustrates a positive feedback loop. I think this diagram may be on the test. It might have been on the old one they used to use. I definitely looked over it though. And basically you have erosion, invasive species take hold, compaction occurs, water can't get in, and then they all kind of point to decreases in grass, native grass, and growth and survival. The degraded rangelands have cost about $23 billion worldwide. That's a lot. And the government, U.S. government, subsidizes this activity, of course. And so out west, the largest landowner in the United States is the Bureau of Land Management, BLM. For short, we're going to talk about that in detail next unit. But public lands out in the west, Bureau of Land Management lands, what ranchers can do is they can pay like a cost per head of cattle to graze, and it's a lot less than the actual cost if you were going to graze on other land. And so A Tragedy of the Commons, the pamphlet that Garrett Hardin wrote about was actually called A Tragedy of the Commons, and his original work was based off of an open pasture where people can come and graze their cattle. So this is actually really happening out west now. And so we subsidize it because taxpayer dollars are kind of cut short in what we could earn from the ranchers. So here's what that looks like. That doesn't look like great grazing land to me, but if you've ever been out west to Utah or Colorado, there are some areas that look like this, and so it's those marginal lands that are used for grazing. Good lands are typically more used for agriculture. Anyway, irrigation. Irrigation is where you're going to artificially supply water. Okay, good. That sounds easy. This is crazy. 70% of all fresh water used by humans goes to irrigation. Just like 70% of all the antibiotics in the United States go into animals. See, this is good. A lot of coincidences here. And so, a couple different kinds of irrigation to know about. Flood and furrow, that's the same word we just talked about a minute ago. There's the furrow, and they just flood it. You can imagine a lot of the water there does not go in and infiltrate the ground. It's actually gets evaporated. And then, have you ever seen these magical green crop circles in an airplane? Have you wondered how that happens? You already understood. Can I show you? So if I am a center pivot irrigation, basically there is a little hole there, and then there's an arm that goes around in a circle like this. And that makes a circle, and that's what's happening. So that is center pivot irrigation in the Arizona desert. Seems like a really good place to grow stuff. If you match crops to the climate, you can reduce the need for irrigation. For example, cotton is one of the most water-intensive crops that we have. Where's super fancy cotton grown? Anybody? In Egypt, which is in the desert. Yep, so that's maybe not a good idea. Now, there is genetically modified cotton that uses less water, and I'm a big fan of that. Like, let's genetically modify cotton to not use as much water, or, strawberries to not freeze. Maybe let's not genetically modify our food so that we can put a derivative of Agent Orange on it. Like, maybe not that. I'm not against all GMOs, but I feel like there's some good and bad to it. Yeah, I think that made my eye twitch, and I'm not kidding. So anyway, a little in conventional irrigation where it's center pivot or flood and furrow, about as little as 43%, I don't know who did that math, can be actually used by the crops. Drip irrigation is much more efficient. Let me show you what drip irrigation looks like. So this is conventional and this is drip. So they have a pipe over the plant and they're dripping water directly on the plant. Now you can imagine this would be really expensive to actually install. And what I have in my yard personally is I have drip irrigation, but I have a hose pipe, and it's called a soaker hose, and it's black and it has holes in it. And I just drag the hose pipe beside the plants and it drips water directly on the plant. And then what I do is after I water that row, I'll pick up the hose and I'll move it to the next row. And so I don't spray the whole garden. That causes erosion, but then also that makes my water bill high. I'm not about that life. So drip irrigation for me. Waterlogging can happen when you overwater, and it can suffocate the roots. Remember, plants do perform respiration. They need oxygen. So salinization, I actually have a video for this. I'm so excited to show you. Salinization is the buildup of salts in the soil. And so saline means salty. And so what ends up happening in areas where you're using groundwater, there will be minerals in the groundwater. And so those minerals, y'all know that salt is just an ionic compound. Or maybe you know that. It doesn't have to be sodium chloride. It could be magnesium chloride, calcium chloride, whatever. Lots of nitrates, all kinds of things. But just basically ionic compounds. When you water and you're in a dry area, the water will evaporate, but the salts are left behind. And they're coming from minerals in the bedrock. Okay? So I have a little video for you for this. It's actually really funny. And I'm going to pause the recording feature of this so that I don't break copyright laws. Oh, there's the pause button. I found you. So, the Bronto has the electrolytes, and that is the same. Electrolytes are just ions, okay? Water actually doesn't conduct electricity. You shouldn't do this, but if you know the warning on your blow dryer is don't use this in the bathtub. I can't imagine a world where that's a good idea. But if somehow you could have pure water in your bathtub, and that's what came out of our faucets, then that warning wouldn't be necessary on blow dryer. Please don't try this out, okay? But that's water. Pure water doesn't conduct electricity. It's only the salts, the ions in water that conduct electricity. So anyway, your tap water has ions in it, like fluoride, for example, right? That's an ion, F-. Just like some people's grades. No, I'm just kidding. Y'all are doing great. So it's easier and cheaper to prevent salinization than to fix it. And so you don't want to plant things that involve using a lot of water in sensitive areas. You want to irrigate with low salt water. So you might have to do in areas that are arid, that you're using groundwater. You may have to filter the water first, or irrigate more efficiently. If you're taking the AP exam, they're asking questions about irrigation or water use. The answer is like drip irrigation, and that solves everything. Like that's just a broad blanket answer that will work. If you want to fix it, you have to flush the soils with large amounts of water to dissolve the salt. But then where are you going to get the large amounts of water from? Right? That was the issue in the first place. You're in an arid place. As far as fertilizers, these are going to be substances that contain nutrients. Now, when I grade your FRQs, I'm having a psychic vision, because it happens every time, really. I'm not having a psychic vision. But people get fertilizers and pesticides mixed up. They're not the same thing. Fertilizers contain nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus that help plants grow. Okay? So, pesticides kill things. Let's not get it mixed up. Let's not do that. Because if you use the wrong word, whichever word you use first is the one I grade. And so, well, people that just like cover all their bases and put them both, and a lot of times they'll put the wrong one first. So, don't do that. Anyway, fertilizers can be inorganic and organic. One of the FRQs I feel like I picked, you have to discuss the difference between the organic and inorganic and positives for each. Inorganic is like we had talked about how we use ammonia for nitrogen. Ammonia is NH3. And so that's inorganic. It's not from manure or crop residue or whatever. And you can spray that directly on the plant and it's immediately available or within a short period of time. Organic fertilizers, what they'll do, you can't just get manure just with nitrogen in it. So organic fertilizers will have a mixture of all the macronutrients you need. So that's a positive. The negative is that it takes time for those things to decompose and be available to life. Also, organic fertilizers, they will help to keep moisture in the soil. If I spray ammonia on my soil, like that's not helping with water retention or pH. That's not helping. So compost is a great option for organic fertilizer, and you can make that yourself if you have a composter. And so inorganic fertilizers, this looks more like to me like lime. Maybe they're putting some calcium. Lime is calcium carbonate, like limestone. Okay, so if your soil is too acidic, you can put lime on your soil because that's what's in it, an acid, right? Or if you needed something like sulfur, not sulfur, that's not really something people use. But if you needed potassium or something like that, does anybody ever buy fertilizer and it's got like, have you ever seen like 10-10-10 or 30-10-10? Do you ever go? So those are the amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in that order in that fertilizer. So that's what that is. And so if you go by 10-10-10 and you put it on your crops, then that would have about 10 units. I don't know what the units are. Nitrogen and phosphorus and then potassium. So anyway, organic fertilizer it will help with the soil structure. It will help prevent the pH from getting too high or too low. It helps buffer the pH. Inorganic don't do that. No, they don't do that. So traditional agriculture only had organic fertilizers, and so the Green Revolution, that mid-century kind of push to make more crops, did bring in the use of inorganic fertilizers. The problem with that is the organic material, really, it stays in the soil. It helps with soil structure. It's not going to run off, and if it does run off, it won't be as harmful as chemical fertilizers. And so it's those chemical fertilizers we talked about that cause eutrophication, followed by algal blooms, which is followed by hypoxia. Remember all that? That's what we're talking about. We're connecting it back to that. Nitrates can also contaminate groundwater. And that causes something called blue baby syndrome. I haven't seen that too much on the AP exam, but if it's there you go. So here's fertilizer use. You can see that it's gone up a lot. And so the deal is nitrates and phosphates can infiltrate into the groundwater and can contaminate groundwater and make it undrinkable. That's an easy answer on the AP exam. If it wants to know about water, you can just talk about that. Drip irrigation, those little pipes I showed you, or the little hoses, you can put the nutrients and they can be delivered directly to the plant. That will cut down on eutrophication. And also no-till planting, you can drill a hole, put the seed in the hole, and then put a little bit of fertilizer in the hole with the seed, which is pretty cool. So it's kind of pinpointed. And then we want to monitor those. So tomorrow we're going to test the nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium of your soil, and then there's recommendations that you can follow for your soil. So if your soil doesn't need phosphorus, then you shouldn't put it on there, and you can test that. As far as policy goes, externalized costs are often ignored. I think that's good. Like I said, we can graze on federally owned land for $1.35 per animal per month. That's really cheap. And so that encourages overgrazing, and I tried to share the comments. Wetlands were areas that were seen as, kind of a threat because diseases could get spread there. And so they were often drained for agriculture, and then government policy actually encouraged it in the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s. And so now we have the Wetlands Reserve Program. This is on your test. And so what happens now, landowners are actually paid, like if there were farming areas that were wetlands, they're paid to stop farming them so they can be restored. And we had talked about wetland restoration last unit. So I think I'll stop there for today, and then we'll do the lab tomorrow and finish this up on Monday. Alright, so we talked yesterday, wetlands had been drained for farming, and the thing about wetlands is there's a lot of biotic material that was partially decomposed because of the anaerobic environment, the anoxic or without oxygen type environment. And so that made for good agriculture, but wetlands have their own intrinsic value, and so we're going to talk about that in Unit 6. Until then, the Wetlands Reserve Program, which I remember is on your test, paid farmers that had areas that had been drained that were formerly wetlands to restore them back to wetlands. And so if I was a farmer and I had an area that, I had drained, or my grandfather had drained, I could get paid to make up for that loss of land and the money that I would have gotten from it. So then the farmers can stay in business and wetlands can be restored. So this is actually an example of a positive government subsidy. I don't think we've had one of those yet. So there we go. And so here you can see that this area that was agriculturally used is now being flooded again. Conservation Reserve Program is similar, also on the test. So not all land that is kind of marginal or could be used for something else is wetland. So in this situation, the Conservation Reserve Program paid farmers to put highly erodible land in conservation reserves, which means that the farmers that have land that may get eroded or not that great as far as land quality, they could get paid for their loss of use, and then that land would be replanted as native wildlife. When we talk about grasslands in North America, we talk about like 99% of that have been converted to agriculture. So this is a good way to save soil from getting eroded and then also restore biodiversity. Moving on. Oh, yep, that's it. So industrial agriculture uses all the following except, which one? Lyrica. Well, industrial agriculture uses all the following. So, I think you're thinking of subsistence. So, current day agriculture uses all the following except which one, Kobe? Caitlin Simpson, can you help him out? Sure. So, like down on the farm today, we don't typically use animals to pull our plows. Now we got it. Okay, good. Biological weathering is characterized by what? Cody? Yeah, organisms breaking down parent material. That's when you get on your parents' nerves. Just kidding, this bedrock. Which horizon is the most valuable for agriculture? What did you say, Kobe? Which one? Yes, again, thank you. It is A. And if O had been there, that would be important, but the A is the top soil. Erosion increases through all the following except, which one, Jason? Yeah, because all the above increase erosion. Which a sustainable farming method involves planting different crops from year to year. Lucy? Yeah, so that's crop rotation B. Differences between organic and inorganic fertilizers include which is fine, and this is, like I said, this is on one of the FRQs this time. So, Faith, what you got? Sure, right. And so if we use inorganic fertilizers, it's not going to help retain moisture in the soil because it's not helping the structure of the soil, the actual clumpiness or the the texture. According to this graph, which land use causes the least erosion? Silas. Yeah, so native vegetation, because you can see it's, almost none. All right, so chapter 10, I'll stop it and I'm gonna make another little video. Are y'all not even ready for a break, right? Oh well, all right. So in chapter 10, we really get into the human impacts instead of just talking about soil. So we're going to get more into agriculture and biotechnology. So maize, a traditional crop grown in Mexico, started about 9,000 years ago. And I told you corn was really like a useless little grass. I had the first little ears of corn were like, pinky size or smaller. And so these land races are really important because if we were to have any problem with the couple strains of corn that we actually grow or maize that we actually grow today, we can go back and pull from these native land races and get genes or get new varieties to plant in case of disease or pests. Because we only have grown a few varieties. And so if you talk to your grandma or your grandpa about bananas, for example, the bananas your grandparents ate are not the same bananas we have today. They had a different flavor and they were like creamier and apparently more delicious. But they were wiped out by disease and they had to be replaced. And if we didn't have that biodiversity there, we wouldn't be able to have that kind of insurance policy. Same thing happened with papayas. And most papayas on the market today are actually genetically modified because of a blight that went through them. Genetic modification, we had talked about, being able to use Roundup or whatever on them so that all the other plants die. But sometimes genetic modification helps with preventing overuse of water and helps prevent diseases. So genetic modification isn't a bad word. I think it has certainly positive things, but a lot of the times it's for monetary greed, and I don't know that I agree with that. So anyway, genes from other species came from U.S. corn because we have our Roundup ready corn, right? And so some of that could blow over the border and get into the land races in Mexico. And so there was a concern there that we would contaminate the genetic diversity that was present in Mexico, and then that would kind of threaten our food supply if we ever needed those genes. Okay, so there's where the corn originated. And of course the population is growing and we have made more food through technology, but you can only squeeze this turnip so much. Soils are in decline in most arable. If you don't know what arable means, it means farmable land is already in use. And we talked about yesterday, 40% of the land on earth is used for farming or grazing, so agriculture. So we can see that the world population has grown up, and so is our production of every type of food, really. We have all these extra people now, say extra. This number is probably closer to 1 billion because the PowerPoint's a couple years old. But people that get fewer calories than they need every day is called undernutrition. And that has to do with inefficiencies in distribution, could have to do with economics. We had a huge drought and we didn't really feel it as individuals. I felt it in my garden, but you didn't feel it at the grocery store. You still have food. But these countries that are really more subsistence farmers, if that had happened and we were growing our food in our yard, we would have been up the creek, right? So, well, there wouldn't have been a creek because it would have been dry. But you know what I'm saying? That would have been problematic. So anyway, most undernourished people live in developing countries, but we still have people in the United States that are food insecure. They don't necessarily know where their next meal is coming from. And so if you look here, it's kind of, these statistics are quite stark. We can see that the millions of people who are undernourished in developing countries have gone down, but we still have about 45% of the people in developing countries that are food insecure and that do not have adequate nutrition. So undernourished means you don't have enough calories every day. So basically half of the developing world doesn't have enough food. Just do that math. And then in the developed world, we have about 15% that are undernourished. So this is a problem worldwide, as you can see. In the United States, we have, of course, I'm going to have this dichotomy and talk about the U.S. now. We have problems with overnourishment, and so people that actually get too many calories. And it's quite backwards, but if you look at affluence, the more money that you have, the less likely you are to be overweight and overnourished because of the abundant cheap junk food and sedentary lives, people that are more affluent tend to exercise. They tend to buy more vegetables, which is, I mean, it's completely backwards. And so now in the United States, 1 in 3 adults is obese. It's not 25% anymore, it's 1 in 3. And so worldwide, 400 million people are obese. If you do the math, if 1 in 3 people in the United States is obese, then you get about 100 million off of that. So, you know, we have a disproportionate amount of overweight people. Malnourishment is doesn't mean you don't have enough calories. It means you don't have enough nutrients. And so you can weigh 400 pounds and be malnourished. You can have a anemia or a vitamin B deficiency or something like that, okay? And so there's a good amount of research actually goes into showing that your hunger is actually coming from, like, do you have enough vitamins and minerals in your food versus do you have enough calories? And so people that are eating these cheaper junk food, processed things, they not only is it cause blood sugar spikes and drops and makes you hungry, but it also is not really nourishing you. And so we just kind of keep going back for these salty and sweet things. So we saw an overall decline in food prices thanks to government subsidies, but 2002 and then really again in 2007, we started seeing an uptick in the amount of ethanol that we were using in gasoline. That's when that started. So the food prices, there's other things going on, but when we started taking our food and putting it in our gas tanks, 10% of your gasoline is coming from ethanol, which is corn. It's a huge amount of corn. That makes food prices go up because you have increased demand, but not a whole lot of change in supply. So this little baby is suffering from what's called marasmus. I've seen 1 or 2 questions, not necessarily on the AP exam, but on the reader's keys where they'll use the word marasmus. This is where you're just really have no food or little food and you're dying of starvation. So that's marasmus. If you've ever seen the small children that are thin like this, but then they have a very big bloated belly, that's called kwashiorkor. It's kind of like Kwashikwor. I don't know if I've hit all those letters, but kwashiorkor, I mean, if you saw the word, you'd be like, yeah. But it's where what those babies, when they have the big bloated bellies, what's going on there is they've been recently taken off breast milk, and they now have no or little to no protein. And so kwashiorkor is a protein deficiency, and that causes the bloated bellies. So Norman Borlaug, I'd mentioned his name before. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for helping supply the developing world with better crop varieties that made more food. So wheat was really the biggest one that he did. This started in the 1940s. Norman Borlaug was really doing his work more in the 60s, I believe. And so developing countries were able to double or triple or quadruple their yields. He didn't do this through GMOs. Like the Green Revolution that he really took a part in was not through genetic modification. They didn't change the DNA in a lab of wheat or rice. What they did is they just brought better yielding crop varieties to the developing world and then introduced irrigation, pesticides, chemical fertilizers, and machinery. And that improved production, right? So there's Norman Borlaug. Hi, Norman. What's up? And so here's some data from India, and you can see that production and production per person rose, and then India went from a net importer of grain to a net exporter, which is pretty impressive with how many people they have. But now how many people they have is directly correlated to the fact that he kind of put this temporary band-aid on a bleeding wound of this overpopulation problem and didn't really address the issues with women's rights, education, contraceptions, cultural values, etc., like we talked about last unit. So the Green Revolution, so you're going to depend heavily on fertilizers and pesticides, irrigation, and fossil fuel power machinery. Did I already like step up on my soapbox and tell you about the difference between fertilizers and pesticides? Did that happen? Yeah. Okay, good. I'll get down. Thank you. Because you're not the same. Not that I have a complex about it. So the amount of land that is cultivated or farmed increased 33%, but energy inputs increased 80 times. And so sometimes you'll hear people say like a sentence that sounds like, we have so much more oil in our food supply. And that doesn't mean that we're putting like petroleum and Twinkies. I mean, yeah, it could be possible. But what they're saying is we're using more oil to process and make the food because we're using machinery to grow it. And then also the fertilizers and pesticides involve petroleum in producing them, and some actually have petroleum in them. So monoculture is how we get around to making all this food. And we do it because it's more efficient. So we have thousands of acres in some situations where it's all crop that may be just corn or soy or whatever. And so, don't say pollution, it's a bad word. It doesn't mean anything. It is more efficient. It's obviously going to devastate biodiversity if you have a monoculture because you have thousands of acres of one thing. We've really narrowed our diet down, and so that's more efficient, like I said, but yields are starting to decline in the areas that the Green Revolution took place because it takes so long to form topsoil, and these are really intensive farming practices. So there's an example of a monoculture, and you can imagine this would be efficient to harvest. This is wheat. But if you have some kind of boll weevil or caterpillar or whatever, and if it comes through, it really could devastate the whole area because if it can thrive off of this wheat, then it can thrive off of all of it, and they can reproduce really quickly. Most pests, if you think about it, are selected. They have high reproductive rates, so that makes it an issue when you're trying to kill them, like in the microwave. So biofuels, I just told you that ethanol is derived from corn. You can also make it from sugar, which is what they do in Brazil. And there's other kind of cellulosic grasses. When I say cellulosic, I mean like the fibrous part of plants that we don't typically eat. There's other ways of making ethanol. And if you were going to make a list of like the most efficient, corn's at the bottom. But we grow corn really well in the United States and we subsidize it. And people that vote for politicians in Iowa aren't going to really give that up. And so just so a couple people can stay elected, we're going to keep doing it. Let me know if I'm wrong. No? Am I not wrong? Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to go off on a tangent there, but it's so true. We already talked about sustainable agriculture and what that means. I mean, we don't want to pollute the water. Well, what is that? Okay, but how? So no-till farming does help. And like I said, you have to be able to argue for and against this stuff. And so no-till farming is going to cut down on erosion. It's going to cut down on fossil fuel use. But we are going to have to use more of the pesticides in this situation, herbicides, like in the form of Roundup or whatever it might be. So raising food, animals for food. Most people do eat animal products, and there are some impacts. Global meat production has increased 5-fold, and per capita meat consumption has doubled. If you do the math there, you're like, okay, meat production has increased 5-fold, so times 5, right? But then per person meat consumption has only doubled. So what's the difference in the math there? Well, our population has gone up, has doubled. See what I'm saying? So that's the difference in the math, okay? Anyway, our population has maybe more than doubled since 1950. It's close. Anyway, as affluence go up, so does meat and dairy products and eggs consumption. And so this is crazy how many like animals, domestic animals. So that's in the United States. So we have 27 billion domestic animals, like 6 years ago. There's only 7 billion people on. That's a lot of pigs and chickens and cows. That's a lot of life. So meat consumption is expected to double by 2050, which is kind of terrifying when you start to do the math on how we need 10 times as much land to grow the food for an animal versus just eating the grain. So anyway, meat and seafood production, or excuse me, this is per person global production, but it's gone up. It's less energy efficient because 90% of the energy goes from one trophic level to the next. This is something I have an ethical dilemma about on a pretty regular basis. Like, should I be a vegetarian? I just eat meat once a day, and that's the best I could do. And if I didn't work out, I probably wouldn't. So, anyway, I try to do the best I can by raising my own animals. And sometimes I'll just eat eggs and not actually eat any meat, but it's really difficult, and we have such a culture that you have to realize, and they'll try to trick you about this on the AP exam, the average person on earth does not eat meat every day, okay? So they'll have a question, and it'll say something like, what is a typical diet for a worldwide whatever? And so they'll have something like rice and fish and vegetables, and that will look good to you because it's like, oh, people like fish, cool. But the answer is really like wheat and corn and rice. That's the typical diet. Maybe some vegetables and meat, sometimes never, sometimes maybe once a week. But if you have, if you live in a developing country and your family has 3 cows, on your little area. Like, you're not going to eat the 3 cows because then you'll just have 2. Okay? So, you know what I mean? Like, let's just save the cow and drink the milk and then call it a day. That's kind of how it goes. Anyway, land and water is definitely needed to raise food for livestock. Beef requires the most because it is the least efficient at producing protein from grain. So let's look at that. There are several questions on the test about this, and they have this diagram over and over again, and the beef thing is really an issue there. So it takes 20 kilograms of feed to produce 1 kilogram of beef, and so that's a 20-to-1 ratio on food conversion. So 2.2 pounds would be what you might buy at the grocery store, a little freezer pack of beef, okay? And so you would have to, does anybody have animals like of your own? 20 kilograms is like a 50-pound food bag. So if you think about that, a 50-pound bag of food, which I went to Tractor Supply and bought yesterday, I was complimented by this really happened, excuse me, soapbox. The man was like, man, you're so strong about picking up that bag. And he like complimented me, and then he told me I was wasting my money on organic food for my chickens. Really? What?
I said, are you paying for it?
Yeah, but he was an employee. That was the funny thing. And I'm like, I'm paying you more. But I just couldn't. I was like, no. I just didn't know what to say. I was offended on many levels. Moving on. Anyway, a bag of food that you can buy at Tractor Supply and organic food like is what would take to make 1 little freezer pack of meat. That's a terrible conversion. What a waste, right? That's crazy. That's a visual that you can think of. So we talked about pork, buying the pig food, which is cheaper, by the way. So pigs, 7.3 kilograms. So you're looking at maybe a 20-pound bag, like a small bag, for a little freezer pack. 4.5 kilograms of food for a kilogram of eggs. And then chicken, you can see chicken is by far the most efficient. So if you are going to eat meat, a lot of meat, chicken is the best bet. But then chickens typically are raised in really inhumane manners. So we talked about that already. Milk doesn't take that much food, but if you look up here, comparatively, it takes more water. It's a lot more water. See that? So 250 kilograms of water to make 1 kilogram of protein. So very water intensive. And all of these, chicken and eggs, are kind of the winner, and the beef is bigger, not because a cow is bigger, but because it's just really, really inefficient. So anyway, maybe not the best option there. We talked about CAFOs a little bit, concentrated animal feeding operations. They're really high density, and there are some positives, and the AP exam will ask you for positives. So you're going to have to, even if things like in your mind may not be good, you're going to have to talk positive and negative about anything. And I think as an educated citizen, you ought to be able to do that instead of just saying, it's bad, very bad. So anyway, the positive of having CAFOs is that if you think about the amount of land needed to graze that many cattle, like instead of putting them in a feedlot, that much land would really cause a lot of biodiversity loss because you'd have to destroy habitat in order to graze the cattle in that much area. See what I'm saying? So there is positive. The other positive is you could use the manure as a fertilizer, right? So those are some positives. A big part as far as a negative goes, other than ethics, is that 45% of the grain that we make worldwide goes to livestock. And then we had talked about 70% of the antibiotics we make in the United States go into livestock. So we have this huge waste going on. Talk about huge amounts of waste. A lot of times these CAFOs, if it floods, and I've seen news images of this, and I can pull it up if I have time, but you'll see this area flooding, and then like they'll have these basically ponds that are holding a lot of the manure and urine and just waste products. And then if it floods, it'll carry all of that into the river, and that does cause eutrophication and hypoxia. And then you have problems with waterborne pathogens. It could be something like cholera. That's a big problem in the developing world. But waterborne diseases and E. coli, stuff like that. Okay, E. coli would be more from livestock. Anyway, the other thing, because all the antibiotics in the food supply, we do have issues with antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So, to spur on growth, animals are fed heavy metals and hormones. We already talked about that a lot. It's like last period, people could ask me questions about it. we talked about cows, especially the ruminants, how they make methane because there's anaerobic decomposition, more than automobiles. So that's a lot. So there's a CAFO for chickens and a feedlot for cows. And so they have aquaculture. Aquaculture is actually raising aquatic organisms. This can be sustainable just like anything else if they do it well. It's the fastest growing type of food production, and the reason it's the fastest growing type of food production is we have a huge amount of population growth and affluence in Asian countries that typically prefer seafood. And then a lot of the native fishing stocks are depleted, and so this is kind of like the option that they have. And so really widespread in Asia. Fish is the most aquacultured organism. Plants would be like kelp. Kelp is really used a lot in beauty aids, health and beauty aids, some soaps and stuff. Mollusk and then crustaceans. So you're talking about your oysters and your clams and all that. It is a reliable source of protein. It can be sustainable, and then it's going to reduce the pressure on the wild fish. It reduces bycatch. A lot of times, like we talked about dolphins say tuna, right? So if we have farmed tuna, I don't know if that's a thing. I haven't heard of that. Tuna are huge predatory fish. They need a large amount of space. I don't think that exists, but it would reduce the bycatch of accidental capture of in that situation for dolphins. That's bycatch. A lot of waste. Sometimes the fish can get out and they can spread diseases because they'll often have mites and they'll be treated with antibiotics and they're fed grain. And fish eat corn. That's crazy. Fish do like to eat corn if you go trout fishing. Fun facts with Miss Freeman. Throw a salmon egg on the end and you're good. Has anybody ever done that? Yay. Okay. Do y'all know how redneck I am? Y'all don't know the depths of my redneckery. What? I'm a hippie, and I might have been white trash at one time. Started from the bottom. Next. We were talking about Drake earlier. You know that's funny. So this is not a genetically modified salmon or anything. Is that a salmon? I'm doubting my life. It's just, it looks crazy because it's, fish. It just looks weird because it's so big. But this is a farm salmon, and that's a wild caught salmon. It's not genetically modified. It's just that these are fed corn and grain and fattened up. Now, if you were to go to the store and buy farm salmon, which is very common, like if you go to the store and you just pick up some salmon, it's farmed. And then, by law now, they have to put on there that it's, treated with food dye to make it redder. But it doesn't have the omega-3 fatty acids because it's not eating the wild diet. Yes?
At Costco, when we buy salmon, you can tell the difference.
You can.
It's so much redder than the wild caught.
Yeah.
It looks like a penny.
It's not.
It's pretty.
So if you go to a restaurant, it's going to be, if you go to Longhorn and get some salmon, it's going to be farm salmon. Unless you go to a high-end place and you're going to spend $100, and then how many people could that have fed? Moving on. I don't go out to eat much. So preserving native variants. We had talked about crop diversity and the land races of maize in Mexico and why that's important. Monocultures are really vulnerable. If you get any kind of disease or pest, they can really spread quickly. Only about 30% of the corn varieties in Mexico in 1930 still exist today, so we've lost 70% of that biodiversity. And there's this seed bank kind of thing that's happening to help that out. So anyway, here's some traditional food plants from the Southwest. And then this person is pollinating by hand. The reason she's pollinating by hand is so that she's ensuring that the offspring is of the same variety. We bought some seeds and we started them in our basement. These are things I do for fun after I go to Tractor Supply. But the way that those seeds are grown to ensure me that they're the right kind of variety of tomato is they have them separate. And then they have to pollinate them by hand because if this little honeybee goes over and visits this kind of tomato and then comes over and visits this one, then I wouldn't get the kind that I was looking for. So they have them in greenhouses so they can't get back and forth, or they have to do it by hand. And then those seeds are $4 for 10 seeds. I'm talking about 10 seeds out of tomato. How many seeds are in a tomato? Way more than 10. Anyway, seed banks help with this. What they do, seeds will last a couple years. So what they'll do is it's like a underground, it's not refrigerated, but it's cold, like a cellar. But it's like a legit huge thing. But you know how you can keep stuff in a cellar for a while? That's the same idea. Anyway, so every couple years they'll have to get the seeds out and they'll have to plant them and then take those seeds and put them back because they don't last forever. Like seeds don't last forever; they just last for a while. So there's seed vaults for that. I don't know if I need to explain the birds and the bees to you today. I feel like I've done that before. Ecosystem services for the 15th time. Birds, bats, bees, hummingbirds. Yeah, that's the same. Native bees provide $3 billion in yearly pollination. Honeybees are actually not native. They're from Europe, particularly Italy. So that's fun facts. I used to have bees and then all mine died. So nostalgia. So why did they die? There's something called colony collapse disorder, and that's where you have beehives that vanished. We're not really sure what's causing it. Bees can fly several miles away, and so if you have crops nearby that are treated with insecticides, it turns out that bees are insects, so they will die from that. And so that, I think that has a lot to do with it. And then also there's like little mites and stuff, little parasites that get on them, and then so. There's a whole family of insecticides, and I'm trying to think of the name of it, that kill bees. And I feel like when y'all brought in your eco-labeled stuff, we talked about that a little bit, like bee-friendly stuff. Yeah. So anyway, here, I think this is where I'm going to stop. I know we have a couple minutes left, but this is a good time to pick up on Monday. Alright, so this is aquaculture. We had talked about that just briefly, just to kind of review what we were discussing. This is not a genetically modified salmon. It just happens to be fed corn, and it's in a pen, so it doesn't, it can't get out. And this is done in open water, so they'll pretty much put a partition inside of a like a coastal area, and then keep the fish in there. They are given antibiotics, and they are fed things like chicken litter. They do not have the omega-3 fatty acid levels that other wild-caught seafood does. And I went to Kroger yesterday and I looked. The farmed fish is much cheaper. Farmed catfish is a good choice. Catfish is not high in omega-3s anyway. Farmed shrimp is also okay if it's domestic. What I mean is it's raised in the United States. So those are good options. Tilapia is not that great. We already talked about monoculture. It's just having one food crop for thousands of acres. It's important that we have the genetic information from wild stocks or land races of seeds. Seed banks help us do that. What they do is they preserve seed types, and what they'll do is they'll put them underground in kind of a cool area. It's a very large area, actually. And seeds don't last forever, so they'll have to get them out every couple years and grow the crop, and then put the seeds back into the bank after it germinates and grows. And so there are a few different global seed banks, and so those protect our genetic diversity in case of a disease or a pest that wipes out some of our monoculture crops or the strains that we prefer. Did I tell you guys that this has happened already with bananas and papayas, and we had to go back to the genetic diversity that was present? Like basically the grandma's bananas that she ate 50 years ago are not the same bananas you eat today. It's a different variety. Papayas, almost all papayas on the market are genetically modified, and so they GMO, right? But they were genetically modified because they all kind of fell, I don't want to say prey, but they all were susceptible to some kind of little disease or something, and so they had to restart that, which is pretty interesting. So genetic modification is not bad in a sense, but it allows us to pick genes and fix problems, but it also allows us to be able to put pesticides on our food and it kill all the plants except the crop. Pollination, we've already talked about the ecosystem service. Bees are very important, and so we don't really know what's happening with bees. There is an issue called colony collapse disorder, and entire beehives have vanished, and that happened to me. We would buy bees and they would die, and we would buy bees and they would die, and it was very expensive. So we quit beekeeping. So it could be insecticides. Some plants that you buy from Home Depot are, it's like, I'm not even going to try to say the name of the pesticide out loud. I don't have it in my mind right now. But some pesticides, I mean, obviously, insecticides, bees are insects, and so that does affect them. And especially when we're thinking about things that we put insecticides on, those are crops, right? And so bees are also pollinating those crops that you're putting insecticides on, so you can see the issue there. We had talked about the eco-label for like bee-friendly crops at the beginning of the year, so that's something. But this is called colony collapse disorder. That may be on the AP exam. It probably is. All right, so pests and pesticides, here's the deal. Pesticides are not the same as fertilizers. We already had that conversation, okay? And pesticides is an umbrella term. And so if I say umbrella term, what I mean is, under the umbrella of pesticides, I have a lot of other things. So there's my umbrella. That actually looks like an umbrella. I don't ever draw anything right. So a pesticide could be an herbicide. I'm just going to abbreviate. It could be a fungicide. It could be a rodenticide. It could be a, yep, that's those. And so a pesticide is a broad term. So a pesticide does not just kill insects. When I say an herbicide and I'm talking about Roundup, that's also a pesticide. So a pest is just anything that is damaging to crops, and it includes several different types, okay? So just keep that in your mind. Please be careful tomorrow in your FRQs. Everybody does it. I mean, it's just, it happens. Don't just say the words pesticide or insect. Pesticide and fertilizer back to back. Okay, I can only grade the first one. The second one's wrong. You negate your first answer. So if you use both at the same time, you will get no points, period. 0. Okay, got it. I mean it. It's not because I mean it. It's because I do this for fun. In the summertime, I'm excited. I've already reserved my hotel room at the Hilton. I'll see y'all all in Cincinnati. No? Okay, sorry. Just me. Pesticide treadmill. So what happens with this is there's genetic diversity. Here, I'm going to show you a picture. There's genetic diversity in a population, and so these magical red bugs, I mean, they're not really magic, but what they're doing in this illustration is showing that those happen to be genetically they are, what's the word I'm looking for, resistant. They're resistant to the pesticide. And so the other parts, the other individuals die, but when the pesticide is applied, but just these two are like, well, I guess we're the only two left on Earth. Haha, that's a joke. Anyway, so they breed, and then their offspring will have their genes, right? That's how natural selection works, yes? And that adaptation to be resistant to the pesticide, when they spray the pesticide again, they are not affected, or not affected as much. You have to put more, you have to have a stronger strain of pesticide, and that's currently happening. There are a lot of cases of pesticide resistance, and so they're having to use, Monsanto has had to come out with stronger and stronger types of Roundup, and so that's a little bit terrifying because it's already pretty potent and is an endocrine disruptor. We already talked about that. Biocontrol is a strategy that uses a pest predators or parasites to control the pest, and so some parasitoid wasps are actually used, and so I actually on my garden, I use a soil bacteria that I kid you not. It was a soil bacteria that was found in a sugar plantation somewhere in the Caribbean, and I put it on my squash and stuff. And it is unlisted. The Organic Material Research Institute is organic, okay, yeah. And so it's a soil bacteria, and it kills the stuff on my squash. And so that's an example of biocontrol. Another example of biocontrol is BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, and it's also a soil bacteria, similar to the one I found in the, I didn't find it in the Caribbean, but you know, whatever. And this is actually, they will ask about this a lot on the AP exam. So BT, the soil bacteria, what they did, this is an example of genetic modification. They found the genes from BT, this bacteria that lives in soil, and they inserted that gene into corn so it would make the same chemicals that killed caterpillars and flying beetle larvae. So corn, BT corn, that's another kind of genetic modified corn, makes this, makes the chemical that BT, the soil bacteria, does. So they inserted that gene. That's a transgene because it's a gene from another species. And this specific one they will ask about. And this is on my test tomorrow too. I just saw it. So that soil bacteria itself could be used, or you could put it into corn and change their genes. You could do either one. But BT corn is a very common GMO. Here's an example of biocontrol. Cactus moths were introduced to control prickly pear populations. Extra credit for the alliteration there. In Florida, and you can see after they introduced the cactus moths, the prickly pear cacti, ooh, a lot of grammar here, their populations decreased precipitously. Just kidding. That's funny. So anyway, we don't really know what could happen when you introduce a biocontrol agent like the cactus moths because you have non-target effects. And so this non-target effect could be, is pretty much it's a given, okay? And so the non-target effect of that cactus moth was, you know, the cactus moths, they weren't really good at following directions. Seems like moths don't really do that well. Neither do high schoolers. But, shots fired. Just kidding. They also ate some of the endemic cacti because they didn't know. And so sometimes if we decide, oh, this is not really what I meant. Oh no, I can't, if I don't like a pesticide, if I don't like an insecticide, for example, I can just stop using that insecticide. But if I don't like a biocontrol agent, I can just be like, oh, I'm not going to spray that this year. They're alive and crawling around, okay? So you can't really do that. You have to plan it out a little bit. So people always get integrated pest management confused. The AP exam really likes it. It's on my test too. So let me explain it to you. Okay, here we go. On the right hand, I have organic agriculture, which is no chemical fertilizers or pesticides. You have to not use irradiated seeds. We talked about this when we talked about eco labels, and I'm about to tell you again. So that's organic. It has a lot of regulations, okay? And then on this left hand, I have monoculture, industrialized agriculture, where I'm planting a monoculture. I'm spraying it with broad spectrum pesticide, which kills everything. I'm using chemical fertilizers. I'm really being very mechanized. Okay, so those are two hands. And then integrated, you know what integrated means? It's like a mix together, right? Integrated pest management is a mixture of both in order to not plant a monoculture and spray everything until everything dies, but still make money. Okay. So this is kind of what is practiced in an area where it's using a mix, okay? Integrated means to mix, okay? So you're going to population monitor the pests. You can use biocontrol, that's cool. You got to use chemicals, then do it. That's not organic, it's not organic, okay? You can use crop rotation, and then GMOs are okay. So you're just mixing things up and doing whatever is economically feasible, but you're trying to mitigate the chemicals if you can. But you can use them, and you can use GMOs. So I'm saying it's kind of in the middle, all right? So IPM increased rice yields by 13%, cut pesticide use in half. And the reason they're able to do this and make more money is because they're doing more monitoring and a little bit more data. So if you were to go to UGA and or ABAC and get a degree in agriculture, this would be what they would teach you. Like you would, because you want to make money, and straight organic is not always possible. And then I told you there's like a 3-year period. Well, maybe you don't remember. I'm about to tell you again. There's like a 3-year period where you're not completely, you can't get an eco label for organic. So maybe this would help you transition. Anyway, so here's pesticide production. You can see it dropped. They dropped their pesticide subsidy, and their rice production actually picked up, and this was in Indonesia. So that's pretty cool. Organic, so here I'm going to segue back into organic. So what you can do here, no synthetic fertilizers or pesticides. I just told you that I use a pesticide on my organic food. It's a soil bacteria, but it's not, I'm not using glyphosate, which is Roundup, right? So I'm not, anyway, what the Organic Food Production Act, this is what regulates the organic USDA, organic eco label. There are some states that have higher, stricter guidelines. And so there's the eco label that you know. And so I'm going to zoom in on this and really talk about it, because I just have, personally, I have like way too many friends that don't even understand what's going on. I don't feel like that got any bigger, but that's fine. What I said earlier was the land has to be free of prohibited substances for 3 years, and we don't subsidize this process. So if a farmer, once they go organic, they're really going to lose money for 3 years because they're not going to be able to get extra money from that eco label. No GMOs. So by default, if you buy some organic, it's non-GMO. You don't need the extra eco label, but sometimes they'll put it on there just because people don't know. No irradiation of the seeds to kill bacteria. You can't use sewage sludge. That shouldn't concern you that other people can. Organic seeds are preferred but not required. You cannot use synthetic fertilizers. You can use cover crops, animal waste. So they will use like Like if I have a chicken house in Alabama that's like a crowded up CAFO, they can use that manure. That's fine. So that's like a little loophole. So I like to talk about the positive and the negative. Most conventional pesticides are prohibited. You can use biocontrol mechanical practices that could involve like physically removing the pest, which I do in my garden, like if I see one, I'll kill it. Or you can use traps. You can use pheromones, which would, like if you use a little box and put a pheromone, which is a reproductive chemical that attracts them, and so they go into the little box and they can't get out. Mammals, if you want livestock, mammals have to be raised organically from the last third of gestation. From poultry, the second day of life. So then, for poultry, they could still give them some immunizations or whatever at the beginning. Feed must be 100% organic. So if we think about it, we talk about only 10% of the energy going on to the next trophic level. So when I put extra money into my crops to grow them organically, and then I want to have an organic animal, organic chicken, organic beef, then not only does that energy input compound, but that price that you pay as a consumer compounds because the 90% of the energy is lost. Do you see what I mean? Can I get that? Dairy cows must receive 80% organic food for 9 months, and then 3 months of 100%. Hormones or antibiotics are prohibited. Vaccines are permitted. And then animals must have access to the outdoors. So when you buy something organic, you know it's not GMO. You know that the animals were treated more humanely, and you cut out a lot of kind of gray areas. But there are some things that, you know, maybe wouldn't resound with everybody. You have lower input costs because you can't use the chemicals, fertilizers, and pesticides. There are costs of switching, and then getting that certificate takes years, and so you could be losing money there for a while. We don't subsidize this. We actually can't keep up with demand. It's increasing. It's really going up quite a bit as people become more aware of what's happening. This is sales of organic food, extent of organic agriculture. You can see an increase in both. Those are coffee berries, by the way. Coffee is like little red berries. I saw them in Hawaii. It was cool. European Union actually supports and subsidizes the conversion. You surprised? No, me neither. Okay, but we don't. I like this. Farm Bill gives $112 million over 5 years, and so that's really it's as profitable as conventional farming, but the transition period is expensive. The last big topic that we need to talk about is biotechnology and genetic engineering, and this is where we're going to add, delete, and modify DNA. Like I told you, we can take the Bt soil bacteria genes and put it into corn, and then it will secrete the same chemicals that kill caterpillars. Corn will, which is like, then you eat the corn, it's totally fine. It has been proven to be pretty safe. So let me give you the example of the Bt corn, okay? And so what we're going to, I touched it. I'm sorry. My computer is so sensitive. It's hard to buy a Valentine's Day presents for it because it's sensitivity. I'm just kidding. So anyway, so here's a bacterium, and actually use, true story, they use, to do genetic engineering, they do E. coli the bacteria. They use a strain of E. coli. And bacteria, I don't know if you remember this, but they have their DNA in a little plasmid. Did you learn about this? They have a little circular thing. Okay. Anyway, they find the gene that they like from Bt, or like I told you about strawberries that don't freeze. They find the gene in cabbage that keeps it from being frost resistant. Whatever the gene is they want. They insert it into the E. coli plasmid, the gene that they were looking for, and then they put that into the chromosomes for the corn. And so, you know, genes are really nothing but codes for producing amino acids, which make proteins, which is what you do. Like, that's how you're alive. And so basically they use this also, for example, for insulin. Okay, they found the gene in mammals that makes insulin, and so they actually programmed bacteria, like in little petri dishes, to create the insulin for your grandma or whoever has diabetes. So GMOs do a lot more than just make our food grow. So I find that to be interesting. We have little factories of bacteria, so that when we get diabetes from eating GMO corn, the GMO bacteria fix it. Okay, creepy. You can see that the use of GMOs is going up. Soybeans and corn, I already told you that. Cotton GMO is so it doesn't use as much water, which I think is cool, but it also, they have it genetically modified, so you can use Roundup, of course. And then canola, and we already talked about that. And you can see the United States leads in this. Traditional breeding is different because the genes are going to come together, and you're not taking stuff from different species, okay? Well, I just told you transgenic work transmutes across. You take in like a cabbage gene and put it in a broccoli. Like, that would never happen. Like, you never put broccoli and cabbage together. No matter how many candles you got, they're not making a baby. That's not funny. I'm sorry. There's no amount of roses that's going to get that going. So, anyway. That's funny. Plants are actually really interesting. They have a polyploidy, so like they are able to do genetic things that mammals can't do. They can kind of change as far as the number of chromosomes and stuff. Like, if you were going to get that to happen, you could get it to happen faster with plants than you could like animals, but still it's not a thing. I'll give up. So anyway, GMOs make a lot of money, and we are using quite a lot. 90% of our corn, soybean, cotton, and canola are GM, and it's more than that now. Yay! You do increase yield. You decrease irrigation, deforestation, and land conversion because you can grow more on smaller amounts of land. So CAFOs, you can make the same argument. Concentrated animal feeding operations preserve biodiversity because you're using less land because you're more intensively on getting protein, or in this case grain, out of a small area. So if you have BT corn, for example, that makes that soil chemical from the soil bacterium, you wouldn't have to spray that with pesticide. Now, turns out that caterpillars are, what do they turn into? Butterflies. And so monarch butterflies populations have been decreased because of BT corn. Because they're like, hey, I'm flying to Mexico. Cool, let's just stop here and die. So that's been a thing. So there's a precautionary principle. Maybe we should have tested this stuff, but that's fine. And so here's the cases of herbicide resistance. This glyphosate, that is the chemical name for Roundup. The AP exam will not use the word Roundup because that's a trademark, and that might get people, like, I don't know, mad. So just heads up on that. Another really common pesticide is atrazine. And so you may see those two words on the AP exam. They will not use the brand names. So heads up on that. Is it ethical to tinker with genes? I don't know. I don't have a problem with it. It's just, is it for something like drought tolerance? Is it for increased nutrition? Is it for salinity tolerance? Those are beautiful. I think we should totally work on that. But that's not where the money is. So that's not really what's happening. Plus, these areas in the developed world, the developing world that really need salinity resistant, that need drought resistance, that don't have the availability of fertilizers, and they could pesticides, and they could use BT corn. They don't have the money because this stuff is patented. They don't have the money to buy the seeds every year. They would want to save their own seeds, but we saw in the movie how you cannot do that. So that's the issue. It costs money, and then the people that really need the technology for these things, like they don't get enough vitamin A. They wanted to make golden rice so it would make vitamin A. They don't have the money to buy. The reason their vitamin A is deficient is because they don't have money for vegetables, so they don't probably have the money to buy the seeds every year, you see. Anyway, Monsanto has many lawsuits. We already talked about them. This is a nice canola farmer, and he was sued by Monsanto because the pollen from the GMO next to him blew into his area, and they sued him because their patented information was on his land, and they won. So that's kind of messed up. Many nations label GM foods. There are countries that have no food or little food supply that were getting aid from the United States government that have continued to reject GMO crops even for their starving populations. This is what's in your Doritos, except for the organic ones, which I saw at Kroger yesterday. Put it on Instagram. It's Insta famous now. Anyway, you can go to farmers markets and get CSAs. There's several little farms that deliver baskets weekly. My friend gets one, or you can have your own garden. Anybody go to the farmers market? Has anybody been? Yeah, so that's awesome. Here's the farmers market. Woo! There are better ways to do things. That's in there. All right, which statement is true? We have more sustainable food, and we have become more sustainable in food production. Blah blah. Just to kind of speed this up so the bell doesn't ring on us. What you have, Isaac? I'll give y'all a second to look over it. I feel like there might be a better answer. What do you say, CJ?
Me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, what is the condition in which a person receives fewer calories than they need? 2 words, they're not the same though. David?
Food.
Yeah, undernutrition, which is different than malnutrition. We talked about it already. Which of the following is not correct for the green revolution? So, what say you, Tony? Yep. Poor farmers really can't swing the cost of the mechanization, irrigation, and chemical fertilizer and pesticides, which I didn't use in a sentence together. Which statement is not correct about factory farming? Nick? Yeah, and so eating grains is going to be the most energy efficient. So, which is not a problem with using pesticides? Da-da-da-da-da. Hannah. Yeah, of course they're all problems, right? Which statement about GM food production is true? Miranda. Yeah, and so you're going to do that transgenic kind of stuff. Sustainable agriculture, what do you say? Jackson? Sure, and we don't want to deplete it because we can't. Now, I already told you there's 6 questions, 5 or 6, based off this picture. So I'm going to do this one real quick. If a person eats 3 kilograms of meat per week, how many kilograms of grain are required if the meat came from a pig? 3 times 7.3 is about 22. Done. That's the kind of math you're going to have to do tomorrow, okay? See how I did that? Okay. Organic food sales are going up. So I'm going to go with D. All right, cool. So you have like, oh, I don't know, 32 seconds left. If you need to take a second to finish up that lab, I can write you a pass to Wildcat period if that is a choice that you